World Trigger, written by Daisuke Ashihara, is often treated in popular discourse as a tactical shonen with science fiction trappings, alien invaders, dimensional gates, and triggers handheld wearable devices that grant a range of offensive, defensive, and utility abilities. Yet, to reduce the series to mere gimmickry is to miss its central achievement, the translation of strategic reasoning and epistemic uncertainty into the medium of serialized action narrative. The series makes combat a problem-solving space in which information, prediction, resource management, and institutional constraints matter as much or more than raw physical strength or spectacle. At its core, World Trigger posits a domestic invasion entities called neighbors appear through spatial anomalies named gates. These incursions threaten human settlements and are countered primarily by organizations border that employ triggers technology developed from neighbor materials. The narrative centers on three protagonists, Yumakuga, Osamu Mikumo, and Chika Amatori in the early arcs, whose interactions dramatize different epistemic and ethical responses to the crisis. The outsider's tactical fluency Kuga, the institutional underdog's strategic intellect Osamu, and the raw power but naive perspective Chika. The series organizes itself around missions, rank battles, tournaments, and incursions that together form a laboratory for testing the interplay of tools, minds, and institutions. The manga's pacing is alternately episodic short missions and serial long-term strategic adjustments in border, which allows it to both showcase single puzzles and develop meta-strategies across arcs. This structure supports the central thesis. World Trigger is not primarily about one-on-one rivalries or monomaniacal escalation. It is about systems, tactical, organizational, and psychological. The aesthetics and logic of the trigger system. Many shonen series rely on incremental power escalation. The protagonist trains, obtains stronger powers, and overcomes stronger enemies primarily through greater personal strength. World Trigger departs from this by foregrounding external technology, triggers that are modular, limited, and combinatory. This design choice shifts emphasis from individual bodily transcendence to the selection, combination, and management of tools. Key features of the trigger system. Triggers have defined functional categories: firearms, melee, shields, traps, movement, jump type, and support types, scouts, analysis tools. These categories are not merely cosmetic, they determine engagement envelopes and the kinds of information available to combatants. Resource constraints. Each trigger typically requires stamina energy and has cooldowns or usage limits. This introduces an economy of action into battles. Choices must be made about when to use limited high-value capabilities. Synergy and loadouts. Agents carry loadouts, several triggers, and effectiveness depends on synergy. Complementary pairings. A long-range sniper with crowd control support create emergent tactics. Environmental interaction. Triggers interact with the environment terrain, obstacles which the manga emphasizes. This invites spatial reasoning and improvisation, counterplay mechanics. For almost every offensive capability, there is a counter shield types, evasion, traps, allowing for rock, paper, scissors without flattening into pred. These design components turn combat into a constrained optimization problem given an objective, an environment, an enemy loadout, and time pressure, which actions maximize victory probability. The aesthetic pleasure comes from watching characters analyze the problem and implement solutions that respect constraints rather than simply overpowering opponents. Game theoretic implications. Viewed through a game theoretic lens, each engagement in World Trigger is a sequential game with incomplete information and stochastic elements, neighbor behavior, gate interventions. Important properties, imperfect information. Opponents rarely know exact loadouts or intentions. Reconnaissance and inference become first-order tactics. Payoff asymmetry. Objectives differ: capture, survive, escort, producing non-zero-sum concerns within and across teams. Mixed strategies. Characters deploy probabilistic tactics, feints, traps to prevent opponents from exploiting deterministic patterns. Signaling and deception. Using a specific trigger can signal capabilities or bluff intentions. The manga explicitly explores feints and baiting. Through these dynamics, the series uses triggers to dramatize abstract strategic concepts. A combat sequence becomes a narrative of hypothesis formation and hypothesis testing. I assume opponent A will use shield X, therefore I deploy Y to force an opening. Transparency of reasoning. The manga often shows players in head calculations or post-fight breakdowns, making readers participate in the strategy. The beauty of constraint. One argument I will press repeatedly: constraints are the true source of World Trigger's beauty. Unlimited power produces spectacle but often flattening moral and strategic inquiry. Constraints create trade-offs, and trade-offs create drama. When every decisive action carries cost and risk, characters must demonstrate cognitive virtue, foresight, humility, adaptability. The trigger system encourages cleverness over brawn. It's aesthetically pleasing because it foregrounds ingenuity, and ingenuity is narratively interesting. Combat as cerebral contest mechanics and narrative techniques. Information flow and reconnaissance. Combat scenes are often preceded by or interleaved with information gathering. Scouts probe, sensors read signatures, and characters deduce from minimal cues. The manga replicates the epistemic conditions of real-world tactical decisions: incomplete, noisy, and time-pressured data. Initial encounter, minimal observation. Players establish baseline assumptions. Probe and test. Small maneuvers reveal reactions. Counters are noted. Hypothesis, update, plan, adjust based on new evidence. Execution, combination of predictive moves and contingency management. This is cognitive work. It's science-like performed under duress, with characters practicing Bayesian updating implicitly. The text occasionally externalizes these mental moves in dialogue or thought captions, inviting the reader to simulate the same inferences. Temporal management and economy of force. Because triggers have limited uses and encounters are timed matches, gate durations, temporal management is critical. Osamu's strength as a strategist is typically in his economy of force decisions: when to press, when to conserve, when to sacrifice. Combat sequences become case studies in operational art, allocate limited resources across simultaneous objectives, create options for later keeping a trigger in reserve, and force the enemy into unfavorable tempo. The narrative stakes are highest when characters must make irreversible choices, spend the last high-cost trigger to secure a narrow victory, or preserve it and accept a longer gamble. Multi-agent coordination and role specialization. Teams in World Trigger are hierarchical members, have specific roles: scout, anchor, attacker, repair support in certain arcs. Battles are tests of coordination protocols: who trusts whom's timing, how to communicate under firehand signals, quick calls, and how to reassign roles when members are disabled. The manga's depiction of teamwork emphasizes interoperability and the cognitive workload of shared situational awareness. The series excels at showing how simple synergies, a scout marking an opponent for a sniper, cascade into complex tactical shifts. The intellectual pleasure lies in seeing how local role-based rules scale into emergent team strategies, creative problem solving, and improvisation. Because the competitive environment changes and opponents adapt, improvisation is frequently rewarded. The text valorizes players who can invent off-label uses for triggers, repurpose terrain, or manipulate opponents' expectations. These improvisational moments showcase a different kind of intelligence, lateral thinking applied to combat constraints. Minds in conflict, individual cognitive styles. Characters in World Trigger are often mapped to distinct cognitive approaches. Osamu Mikumo, the analytic planner. Osamu's value lies in his predictive modeling. He is skilled at breaking complex situations into subproblems and prioritizing. His psychological arc is one of building confidence. His intellect exists from the start, but he must also cultivate leadership and trust. Yuma Kuga, the adaptive tactician. Kuga's outsider status and experience with high-threat encounters make him a practitioner of rapid pattern recognition and improvisation. Psychologically, he is less beholden to institutional norms and thus demonstrates flexibility. Chika Amatori, the raw capacity node. Chika's overwhelming power but limited tactical experience places her on a different cognitive axis. Learning to integrate her strength into coordinated strategy is as much psychological as tactical work. These differences are not caricatures, rather they create dialectical tension and learning opportunities as characters adopt new cognitive habits from each other. The manga uses interpersonal dynamics to explore cognitive plasticity. Border is an institution with rank structures, politics, and resource allocation dilemmas. The manga portrays how institutions shape individual choices. Selection pressures favor certain behavioral norms, risk-averse commanders, and bureaucratic constraints. Limited Tryon resources produce moral dilemmas. Who receives support? The series interrogates how systems can both enable and limit excellence. Group cohesion is another theme. Trust is a fragile but decisive resource. The narrative often pivots on whether teammates accept each other's judgments under uncertainty. These are psychological dramas in miniature. Competence must be signaled credibly for cooperation to be effective. Ethics under uncertainty. Combat decisions in World Trigger often have moral shades, sacrificing innocence in a larger calculus, choosing to risk teammates to save civilians, or prioritizing mission success over individual life. The manga frames ethical questions in the language of constrained choice. There are no unlimited good options. This procedural ethic is compelling because it mirrors real-world decision-making complexity. The heroism is intellectual as well as moral. Knowledge, agency, and technology. Pulling threads together, World Trigger is a narrative about the management of epistemic risk. Triggers are technology that amplifies agency but within bounded parameters. Characters differ in how they perceive, organize, and exploit those bounds. The story repeatedly privileges cognitive virtues, anticipation, humility in the face of ignorance, and flexibility. It also treats institutions as both enabling scaffolds and constraining architectures. The result is a series that is philosophically resonant. It interrogates what it means to act effectively under uncertainty and how communities cultivate the epistemic norms necessary for collective survival. What makes World Trigger enduringly valuable? The trigger system's constraints produce tactical richness and reward intellectual problem solving. Battles are structured as sequences of inference, hypothesis testing, and resource allocation rather than mere demonstrations of brute force. Psychological depth arises from how characters negotiate cognitive roles, trust, and ethical dilemmas under institutional constraints. The anime medium, when executed with attention to timing, sound, and editing, can elevate the manga's cerebral fights into kinetic arguments that preserve intellectual nuance while enhancing immediacy. World Trigger deserves attention from readers and viewers who seek action narratives that treat thinking strategic, moral, and social as the arena of heroism. Its pleasure is not only in victory, but in the dialectic of uncertainty and decision. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below.